The stars held their breath the night humanity decided to answer back. Lieutenant Damian Cross stood at the observation deck of the UHNS Relentless, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace collapse into pinpricks of distant light. His reflection stared back at him in the reinforced glass, a man who had aged 10 years in the last 6 months. Behind him, the hum of the ship's quantum drive settled into a low purr, and he knew without looking that they had arrived. Beside him, Technical Officer Nina Reeves tapped her datapad, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. She was younger than most of the crew, barely 25, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much too soon. The Shivari had made sure of that when they burned her home colony on Proxima 4. She never talked about it, but Damien had read her file. 3,000 dead in under an hour. Nina had watched from an orbital station, helpless. "Jump complete," she said, her voice flat and professional. "All systems nominal. Fleet formation holding at 98% cohesion." Damien nodded but said nothing. Words felt too small for what was about to happen. The Shivari had been the nightmare lurking in the dark between stars for almost 2 years now. They struck without pattern, without mercy, without reason anyone could understand. 16 human colonies gone. 11 alien settlements wiped clean. The Galactic Council had tried diplomacy first, sending envoys and peace offerings. The Shivari sent back the envoys' ships, empty except for a single message burned into the hull plating in their own language. "Your words mean nothing." So humanity stopped talking. Captain Orrin Blackwell entered the observation deck, his boots clicking against the metal floor with military precision. He was a tall man, lean and weathered, with gray streaking through his dark hair. 20 years in the colonial fleet had carved lines into his face that made him look like he was perpetually squinting into a harsh sun. He had lost his sister on Kepler Station. She had been a botanist, studying agricultural methods for terraforming. The Shivari hadn't even bothered to land. They just burned it from orbit. "Status report," Blackwell said, his eyes fixed on the view screen that dominated the far wall. "Enemy contact confirmed," Nina replied, pulling up a tactical display. "Shivari fleet detected at coordinates 774 by 339. Current count is 468 vessels. Mixed class composition. They're holding position around the Meridian Nebula's edge." Damien felt his chest tighten. 468. The largest Shivari force ever recorded. They were expecting us, he thought. "Our fleet?" Blackwell asked. 42 capital ships, 117 destroyers, 286 fighters, Nina said. "And the Harbinger." At the mention of the Harbinger, everyone in the room fell silent. Even Blackwell, usually unshakable, took a slow breath. The Harbinger was humanity's answer to extinction. A ship so classified that most of Earth's governments didn't even know it existed. Built in the shadow of Jupiter's moon Callisto over 8 years, powered by technology that made quantum drives look like steam engines. It didn't just move through space. It bent space around it. And its weapons, well, the engineers who built them had nightmares. "She's ready?" Blackwell asked quietly. Nina nodded. "Online and awaiting your command." Across the fleet, 40,000 men and women prepared for what came next. In the engine rooms, technicians monitored power cores that could light up a planet. In the weapons bays, munitions specialists loaded shells the size of transit buses. In the medical wards, doctors and nurses sterilized equipment and tried not to think about how many beds they might need. On the bridge of the UHNS Retribution, Admiral Tomas Renwick sat in his command chair, his weathered hands folded in his lap. He was 63 years old and had served in 5 major campaigns. He had seen war in all its ugly forms. But this felt different. This felt final. "All ships report ready, sir," his communications officer reported. Lieutenant Jasper Holt, young and eager, with bright eyes that hadn't yet learned to hide fear. "Good," Renwick said. He activated the fleet-wide channel, and his voice carried to every ship, every fighter, every soul that had come to this place. This is Admiral Renwick to all vessels. We did not choose this war. We tried peace. We tried reason. The Shivari gave us silence and fire in return. They have taken our families, our homes, our future. Today, we take back our right to exist. Today, we show them that humanity does not break. We bend the universe to our will. All ships, advance to battle formation. Prepare for engagement. The fleet moved as one, a coordinated dance of metal and fire. Destroyers formed the outer shell, their point defense systems active and scanning. Capital ships pushed forward in a spearhead formation, their massive hulls blocking out stars. Fighters launched in waves, thousands of them, like angry hornets swarming from a disturbed nest. And at the center, hidden by ECM fields and cloaking technology that cost more than some planets' entire economies, the Harbinger glided forward in silence. Damien watched the tactical display as the distance between the two fleets shrank. 500,000 kilometers. 400,000. 300,000. The Shivari weren't moving. They just hung there in space, their ships pulsing with that sickly green light they used for propulsion. Waiting. Why aren't they responding? Nina whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Blackwell's jaw tightened. They think we're prey. 200,000 kilometers. Then, without warning, the Shivari fleet vanished. Not retreated. Not jumped away. Vanished. The tactical screen went blank, alarms blared across the bridge, and Nina's hands flew across her console. Contact lost. All 468 vessels just disappeared from sensors. No jump signatures, no energy spikes, nothing. Damien felt ice crawl down his spine. This wasn't possible. You couldn't hide that many ships. Not from military-grade scanners. Not from quantum detection arrays. Scan everything, Blackwell ordered. Full spectrum. I want gravitational readings, thermal imaging, electromagnetic pulse detection. They're here somewhere. But the scans came back empty. Space where the Shivari had been moments ago now showed nothing but cosmic dust and distant starlight. Then Nina's console lit up with a single ping. Not from where the Shivari had been, but from behind the human fleet. Contact, she said, her voice cracking. Behind us. Multiple contacts. They're surrounding us. The view screen shifted, and Damien's blood turned cold. The Shivari hadn't vanished. They had moved. Faster than anything should be able to move. And now they had the human fleet in a sphere, trapped like fish in a net. This was it. This was how it ended. But then Admiral Renwick's voice came through the comm, steady and calm. All ships hold position. Harbinger, you are cleared for weapons free. Show them what we brought. And in the center of the fleet, the Harbinger decloaked. The moment the Harbinger revealed itself, reality seemed to pause. It wasn't the largest ship in the fleet, that honor belonged to the carrier UHNS Goliath, but size meant nothing when you looked at the Harbinger. The ship was beautiful in the way a weapon could be beautiful, sleek black metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, geometric patterns etched into its hull that glowed with deep blue energy. It looked less like something humanity had built and more like something they had stolen from the future. Aboard the Relentless, Damien watched the Harbinger's weapon systems come online. Energy readings spiked across every monitor, numbers climbing so high that Nina had to recalibrate her instruments twice just to keep tracking them. "What is that thing charging?" she whispered. Blackwell's expression remained stone, but Damien caught the slight tension in his shoulders. Something the Shivari have never seen before. The Shivari fleet began to move. Their ships, those twisted organic-looking vessels that always reminded Damien of deep-sea creatures, started closing in from all sides. 468 ships converging on 42 capital vessels. The math was brutal, and everyone knew it. On the Retribution, Admiral Renwick watched his tactical display with the patience of a man who held all the cards. Beside him stood Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the chief scientist responsible for the Harbinger's primary weapon. She was a small woman with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She had worked on the Manhattan Project's spiritual successor for 8 years, and the weight of that knowledge showed in every line of her face. "Admiral, the resonance cannon is at full charge," she reported, her accent carrying the precise cadence of someone who had lived in 7 different countries. "We have a firing solution." "What's our effective range?" Renwick asked. "Theoretically unlimited, sir. The weapon doesn't travel through space in the traditional sense. It manipulates the quantum field itself." Lieutenant Jasper Holt turned from his station, confusion clear on his young face. "Ma'am, how does that even work?" Dr. Tanaka smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Everything in the universe vibrates at a specific frequency, Lieutenant. Matter, energy, even spacetime itself. The resonance cannon identifies those frequencies and introduces a counter-resonance. Imagine pushing a child on a swing. If you push at the right moment, they go higher. If you push at the wrong moment, they stop. We're doing the second one, but with atomic bonds." Jasper's face went pale. "You're breaking apart their ships at the molecular level?" "Not just the ships," Dr. Tanaka said quietly. The silence that followed spoke volumes. Meanwhile, on the Shivari command vessel, Warprime Kethris stood before his tactical display, his 4 arms crossed over his chitinous chest. The Shivari were not like humans, their bodies were hard-shelled, their eyes multifaceted, their minds wired for collective thought. Kethris was different. He was a prime, one of the few Shivari capable of true individual thought, which made him valuable as a military commander. "The humans have revealed a new vessel," his tactical officer chittered in their clicking language. "Energy signatures are off our measurement scale." Kethris tilted his head, studying the strange black ship at the center of the human formation. His species had conquered 14 different civilizations. They had seen every type of weapon, every defensive strategy. The humans were young, barely crawling out of their solar system when the Shivari had first encountered them. They should have been easy prey. But something in Kethris's gut, or whatever the equivalent was in Shivari anatomy, told him this was different. "Begin the assault," he ordered. "Overwhelming force. Do not give them time to use whatever that ship carries." The Shivari fleet surged forward. Back on the Relentless, alarms blared as the enemy closed to within 100,000 kilometers. Point defense systems activated automatically, tracking hundreds of incoming targets. Fighter squadrons broke formation, engaging the leading edge of the Shivari advance. Damien gripped the railing of the observation deck, watching tracer fire light up the darkness like fireflies. Explosions bloomed in silence, beautiful and terrible. He saw 3 human fighters disintegrate under Shivari plasma fire. He saw a destroyer take a direct hit to its port side, venting atmosphere and bodies into the void. This was war. This was humanity fighting for its survival. Nina's hands shook as she worked her console. Multiple hull breaches across the fleet. The Valiant just lost primary power. They're dead in space. How long until the Harbinger can fire? Blackwell demanded. 30 seconds, Nina said. Admiral Renwick is waiting for optimal positioning. 30 seconds might as well have been 30 years. The Shivari were tearing through the outer defensive line. Their weapons were biological in nature, living organisms that burrowed into hull plating and dissolved it from the inside. Damien watched a cruiser's armor simply melt away, exposing the crew compartments beneath. The screams probably would have been audible if space carried sound. On the Harbinger itself, Commander Pavel Sokolov sat in the weapons control seat, his fingers hovering over the firing mechanism. He was a quiet man, former Russian military, who had volunteered for this assignment knowing he might be responsible for the greatest act of destruction in human history. His wife had left him when she found out what he was working on. His children no longer spoke to him. But when he looked at the tactical screen, when he saw the colony worlds that existed only as graveyards now, he knew his sacrifice meant something. Target lock confirmed on all hostile vessels, he reported, his voice steady despite the sweat on his forehead. Resonance cannon ready to fire on your command, Admiral. Renwick took one last look at his fleet. At the brave men and women dying to buy him these final seconds. At the ships burning in the darkness. At humanity's last stand. Fire, he said. The Harbinger didn't make a sound. There was no dramatic energy beam, no visible projectile. The ship simply pulsed once, a wave of deep blue light that expanded outward in all directions. And the Shivari fleet stopped existing. Damien blinked, certain his eyes were malfunctioning. One moment, 468 enemy vessels surrounded them, weapons firing, engines burning. The next moment, there was nothing. Not debris. Not wreckage. Not even dust. Just empty space where an entire armada had been. Status. Blackwell shouted. Nina stared at her console, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally, she found her voice. They're gone. All of them. Sensors show 0 contacts. It's like they were never here. Across the fleet, the same scene repeated on every ship. Stunned silence. Disbelief. And slowly, growing horror at what they had just witnessed. On the Retribution, Dr. Tanaka watched her instruments with clinical detachment. The resonance cannon performed as expected. Complete molecular dissociation of all targeted matter within range. No residual energy signatures detected. How many? Renwick asked quietly. Sir? How many Shivari were on those ships? Dr. Tanaka's fingers moved across her datapad. Based on standard crew complements, approximately 370,000 individuals. 370,000 lives, ended in the space between heartbeats. Not killed in battle, not destroyed by explosives or fire. Simply erased from existence, their atoms scattered across the quantum foam of spacetime itself. Jasper Holt turned away from his console and vomited into a waste bin. Renwick closed his eyes for a long moment, then opened them again, his face carved from granite. Send a message to Earth High Command. Mission accomplished. The Shivari threat has been neutralized. But even as he spoke the words, a new alarm began to sound. Nina's console lit up with dozens of new contacts. Not Shivari signatures. Something else entirely. Captain, we're detecting multiple unknown vessels, she reported, her voice rising with panic. They're coming out of nowhere. Different energy signatures, different propulsion systems. I count 20, no, 30, no, they just keep appearing. Damien moved to her station, looking over her shoulder at the readings. What he saw made his blood run cold. These ships were massive, easily 10 times the size of the Harbinger. And they were positioning themselves in a perfect sphere around the human fleet. Not attacking. Just watching. Then every communication system on every human ship activated simultaneously, overriding security protocols and encryption. A voice spoke, not in English or any human language, but somehow everyone understood it. The words bypassed ears entirely, forming directly in their minds. You have demonstrated your capacity for erasure. Now we must decide if you deserve to continue existing. The voice in their heads didn't fade. It lingered like the aftertaste of something bitter, something that made Damien want to scrub the inside of his skull clean. Around him, crew members grabbed their temples, wincing at the intrusion. Nina dropped her datapad, and it clattered against the deck with a sharp crack. Blackwell recovered first, his military training overriding the shock. All stations, report status. Is anyone injured? Responses came back slowly, confused voices confirming that everyone had heard the same thing. Not a broadcast. Not a transmission. Something that had reached directly into their consciousness. On the Retribution, Admiral Renwick stood frozen, staring at the tactical display. The 30 massive vessels surrounded his fleet like ancient judges encircling the accused. They hadn't powered weapons, hadn't made any aggressive moves, but their presence alone felt like a threat. Or maybe a warning. Dr. Tanaka was the first to speak, her scientific mind already working through the implications. Admiral, those ships are using technology that operates on principles we don't understand. They appeared without jump signatures, without disrupting spacetime. They're just here. Can the Harbinger target them? Renwick asked. We could try, sir, but we don't know what effect the resonance cannon would have on vessels of this size and unknown composition. And more importantly, we don't know if they have defenses against it. She paused, adjusting her glasses with trembling fingers. We just erased 370,000 beings from existence. If these newcomers decide we're a threat, we may have just signed humanity's death warrant. Jasper Holt looked up from his station, his young face pale but determined. Sir, I'm detecting no hostile intent from their formations. They're maintaining distance, equal spacing around our position. If they wanted to attack, we'd already be dead. Then what do they want? Renwick muttered. The answer came immediately, as if the unknown entities had heard his question. The voice returned, and this time it carried images with it. Visions that flooded every human mind simultaneously. Damien saw worlds burning. Not just Shivari worlds, but dozens of civilizations, hundreds of them, spanning thousands of years. Species that had reached for the stars only to discover that the universe was not empty, that it was filled with others just as desperate, just as afraid, just as willing to kill to survive. He saw the cycle repeat endlessly, one species developing weapons of mass destruction, using them, then being judged and found wanting. And he saw the Watchers. That's what they called themselves, though the concept translated imperfectly into human thought. Ancient beings who had survived the Great Purges, who had learned that survival meant control. They had established rules, unwritten but absolute. You could fight with conventional weapons. You could war over territory and resources. But you could not erase. You could not unmake. That was the line, and humanity had just crossed it. The visions faded, leaving everyone gasping for breath. Nina was crying, tears streaming down her face. Blackwell's hands gripped the railing so hard his knuckles had turned white. Even hardened soldiers looked shaken, staring at nothing as they processed what they had seen. They're going to destroy us, Nina whispered. Aren't they? For what we did. But Damien wasn't so sure. Something in those visions had felt different at the end. Not just judgment, but curiosity. Maybe even hope. Commander Pavel Sokolov sat alone in the Harbinger's weapons control room, his head in his hands. He had pulled the trigger. He had erased those lives with a single command. The weight of it crushed down on him like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe. He thought about his children, about whether they would ever understand why he had done this. Whether anyone would. A new presence entered his mind, gentler than before. A single watcher, speaking only to him. You carry their deaths, the voice said. Good. You should. But tell us, human, did you understand what you destroyed? Pavel lifted his head, speaking aloud even though he knew the watcher could hear his thoughts. I destroyed an enemy fleet. I saved my people. You destroyed the Shivari war caste, yes. But do you know why they attacked your colonies? Pavel hesitated. Because they're conquerors. Because they wanted our resources. No, the watcher said, and suddenly Pavel saw new images. Shivari worlds, not military installations but civilian centers. Nurseries where young Shivari grew in communal pools. Schools where they learned music and mathematics. hospitals where they cared for their sick. And then he saw those worlds dying, infected by a plague that humanity had accidentally released during first contact. A biological contaminant from Earth, harmless to humans but devastating to Shivari biology. The war hadn't been conquest. It had been revenge. And fear. And desperation from a species watching itself go extinct. Pavel felt his heart shatter. We didn't know. Nobody told us. The report said they attacked without provocation. Your leaders knew, the Watcher said. They chose not to share that information. They chose to let you believe you were victims. It made the killing easier. The revelation spread through the fleet as the Watchers shared it with every human mind. Damien felt rage building in his chest, not at the Shivari, but at the admirals and politicians who had sent them here. At the lies that had cost hundreds of thousands of lives on both sides. But beneath the rage, he felt something else. Shame. And the beginning of understanding. On the relentless observation deck, Blackwell turned to face his crew. His voice was rough, barely controlled. They lied to us. Earth Command knew the truth and they sent us anyway. To do what? Nina asked, her voice breaking. To commit genocide against a species that was already dying? To make sure they died first, Damien said quietly. Before they could take us with them. The logic was cold and brutal and entirely human. Survival at any cost. Even the cost of their own humanity. The Watcher's voice returned, addressing the entire fleet. You stand at a threshold. Behind you lies the path of extinction, the belief that might makes right, that the strong should erase the weak. This path leads only to emptiness. Every species that has chosen it has either destroyed itself or been destroyed by others. But before you lies another path. Images flooded their minds again. This time, they saw cooperation. Species working together, sharing knowledge and resources. They saw conflicts resolved through understanding rather than violence. They saw a galaxy where different forms of life coexisted, not in perfect harmony, but in functional peace. The Shivari are not gone entirely, the Watcher continued. On their home worlds, civilian populations remain, approximately 40 million individuals. They are sick, dying from the plague you accidentally created. You have the medical technology to synthesize a cure. You have the choice to save them or to let them fade into history. Renwick's voice came over the fleet-wide channel, heavy with the weight of command. And if we save them? What happens to us? We've violated your rules. We've used weapons of erasure. You have, the Watcher agreed. And that cannot be undone. But you acted in ignorance, manipulated by leaders who knew better. The question now is not what you did, but what you will do next. Will you compound the tragedy, or will you transcend it? In the medical bay of the UHNS Mercy, Dr. Carla Mendez stood among rows of empty beds, listening to the Watcher's words. She was a trauma surgeon, had spent 15 years putting broken bodies back together. She had lost count of how many soldiers she had saved, how many she had watched die. But this was different. This was a chance not to heal wounds, but to prevent them entirely. She activated her comm link. Admiral Renwick, this is Dr. Mendez. I've been studying the biological data the Watchers provided. We can synthesize a cure, sir. It would take time and resources, but we can do it. We can save them. Across the fleet, similar voices rose. Engineers offering to help rebuild Shivari infrastructure. Scientists proposing research partnerships. Even soldiers, people who had lost friends and family to Shivari attacks, speaking up in favor of mercy. Jasper Holt stood at his station, tears running freely down his face now, but his voice was steady. Sir, request permission to speak freely. Granted, Renwick said. My brother died at Kepler Station, sir. The Shivari killed him. For 2 years, I've wanted nothing but revenge. But this, what we did here today, this isn't revenge. It's just more death. More families destroyed. More people who will never go home. He took a shaky breath. My brother was a teacher. He believed in building things, not destroying them. If he were here, he'd want us to choose the cure. He'd want us to be better than our worst moments. The silence that followed felt sacred somehow. Like humanity was holding its breath, waiting to see what it would become. Finally, Renwick spoke. Dr. Tanaka, disable the resonance cannon. Lock it down with every security protocol we have. If I ever give the order to use it again, I want you to refuse. Understand? Yes, sir, she said, and there was relief in her voice. Dr. Mendez, begin working on that cure. Spare no expense. Commander Sokolov, plot a course to the nearest Shivari civilian world. We're going to fix this. The Watcher's presence in their minds shifted, and for the first time, Damien detected something like approval. You have chosen wisely. The path ahead will not be easy. The Shivari will not trust you immediately. Your own leaders will resist this decision. But you have taken the first step toward becoming something greater than isolated species fighting over scraps. You have chosen to become neighbors. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.